Well, here we are with problem 9.43. We're going to take a look at the step method of allocation. Remember, that's the, direct method of allocation. Remember, that's basically the simplest one, easiest to explain, the least accurate one. It still works, sort of, but mainly a learning device. Okay, so it'll get you started into the process of what we're going to do. So problem 9.43, if we take a look at the information that we have, we'll see that we now have multiple departments. Remember, I said in one of the last lectures that we will be department focused at this point. So we need to look at the identity of departments and what they do. If you'll take a look at this, you'll see that the two production departments are on the top of this chart, and the three service departments are on the bottom. But first, I want to take a quick look at the text. Notice they describe the organization, but they also give us a very important piece of information down in that last sentence. It says that the costs are allocated. Remember, allocated means that we're at that second step. We're moving costs from service departments to production departments. So in that move, we have to use some denominator level, to move that, to move those costs. And we are going to be using for general factory administration, notice that's one of the departments, we are going to be using direct labor costs. For factory maintenance, we will use square footage occupied. And for factory cafeteria, we're going to use the number of employees. So notice that here, even in a traditional organization, you saw a lot more variety and diversity in the drivers that were used. One reason is because this is a little bit easier to get your head around. If you have a cafeteria, the costs are basically related to how many people are eating there. Okay? If you have maintenance like custodial work, well, the cost is mainly related to the size of the area. So the number of square feet would determine the actual cost of cleaning each department. The number of workers in each department would determine how much of the cost of the cafeteria each department was absorbing. And for the general administration, we fall back on direct labor hours. So direct general administration may be not as accurate driver, but it's our old friend, direct labor hours. It was common to have quite a big variety of these cost drivers, these allocation bases, in this step. Typically, we had many fewer at the next step. And the next step, logically, is the one we did in the last couple of chapters, the POR. So PORs tend to have much smaller number of drivers that we see in the traditional system. Things like direct labor hours, direct labor dollars, machine hours, things like that. We could also, machine dollars, I've seen machine cost. But here, we're not doing PORs, which is application. We are doing the allocation of cost from a service department to the production department. And we need to notice that first. So of the many things that you have to learn in Chapter 9, and when we're dealing with more advanced versions of overhead, is you need to focus on how different service departments provide service and see how you can count that. How can you count the service a cafeteria provides? How can you count the service a maintenance department provides? And so that would be early on in the problem. Remember, part of what I talk about in these lectures is how you approach a problem. Well, one of the first things to do is figure out what you're doing. Figure out, okay, I'm doing an allocation, I'm pretty clear on that, and my allocation base is going to be those three things. Get that squared away first, because that tells you what to look for at other parts of the problem. So right now, we can see that we have a lot of data here that we haven't had prior to Chapter 9. If you look at the lower part of each one of those two tables, and actually, this is really one table. Okay, so you should imagine this as one table, not two, and the production costs just sort of side by side. If you look there, we have a lot of non-dollars, non-financial information. Remember, I've been talking about that all term, that we start in cost accounting. Actually, in cost accounting, we mainly use probably, I would say, non-financial financial information. We use a lot of other stuff, and here's a really good example of that. So if you look at the bottom 3 rows that we have there behind me, you'll see that we have direct labor hours, number of employees, and square footage occupied. I mean, how much space is taken up by each department. Notice we have 5 departments, and so each one of the departments takes up a different amount of space. Each department has a different number of employees, and each department uses a different number of direct labor hours. But, wait a minute. When you look a little farther and stare at this, okay, some of it's going to seem familiar, but there are a couple of things that are going to seem odd because you're now one of us. We're changing your brain and you're becoming an accountant. And one step is to realize that all costs are direct to something, right? They're really, what we've talked to you about in the past about direct and indirect costs. Remember, stop and think. We were always talking about the product, okay? And we never said, okay, but wait, there's a lot more going on here. We'll tell you later. But that's the truth. There's a lot more going on, and this is later. So all costs are direct to something. But some of them are indirect to the product. You'll see that if you look at this table. If you look down across the top of this table, you'll see for the 2 production departments, they have the direct labor cost. Okay, that's obvious. You've seen that a lot of times before. You wouldn't notice that. Then look down and you'll see direct material costs. Okay, that's obvious too. And then you look down and you'll see factory overhead costs. Okay. Once again, this will seem normal to you. You've seen this a lot before. Okay. There's a little bit of an anomaly here. I'll come back though. But then now look at our service departments and see what you see. Notice that the service departments also have direct labor. Why? Everyone that works in the factory administration department, their salary is direct to that department. And everyone that works in the maintenance department, their salary is direct to the maintenance department. And the factory cafeteria workers' salary is direct to the cafeteria. Right? So actually, at the level of service departments, all labor is direct labor. And if you look, direct material, 2 of the departments actually have direct material, and one of them doesn't have material amounts. General factory administration, do they have direct material? Of course. Paper, right? That's a direct material. But typically people don't count that often. The amount is not material. However, if you look at the other 2 departments, they do have direct material. The cafeteria has food costs. That's direct to the cafeteria. The factory maintenance department probably has things like oils, certain chemicals, toilet paper, things like that. Those would be direct to the maintenance department. Okay? And then your problem when you look at it, now we'll get to the first, this is not the first anomaly, it's maybe the second or third anomaly. Notice that each of those service departments also has overhead. So actually, each of those service departments also has some indirect costs. This is a bit of a paradox that you will encounter as you're doing the problem, because look back at the 2 production departments. Notice both of those production departments also have internal overhead. Okay? They have costs that they can't clearly identify as direct material and direct labor. For instance, in the production department, when they have equipment, okay, that big stamp, you remember in the video we saw the big stamping piece of equipment? What is the depreciation for that, or amortization? When you do the amortization in the production department for that piece of equipment, what is it? Well, it's overhead. It's just overhead that starts off in the department. What about the cost of computers? Well, that's going to be also overhead, and every department here probably owns its own computers. So every one of these 5 departments has direct material. Well, actually one of them doesn't have direct material, but has direct labor. Most of them have direct material, and all of them have their own little pool of indirect costs or overhead costs. Right? So notice we're getting to a more sophisticated understanding of departments and how they work and what the costs are. Okay, and that's just a starting position. So that's where we're starting off, is with information now in Chapter 9 that's a bit more sophisticated and a little bit more real world. We also have another whole set of information. Look at the bottom 3 rows there. If you look at those, what you'll see is none of that information is financial information. And it also is, it's 3 different types of information that we need to use in order to transfer the cost from the service departments to the production departments. Remember, that's our goal here, is we have those 3 service departments and we have the 2 production departments. We have to take all of the cost of the service departments and transfer them to the production departments as overhead. At the point we do that transfer, they will all become indirect costs. So the $90,000 of direct labor in factory administration will end up divided somehow in the fabrication and assembly departments as part of the overhead over there. So as this moves, the allocation, if you remember, take just a quick second, look back to that chart I had at the last lecture. That chart where we have service department costs and then allocation to production departments. At that transfer, every cost that is in the service department becomes an overhead cost as it gets transferred to the production department. Okay? And that's what we'll do next, after one more second. When we look at all this information at the bottom, at some point we're going to have to take all of that information and convert it to decimal fraction. Now let's take a look just at the first row right now. We have direct labor hours, and notice we have direct labor hours in all 5 departments. So in fabrication we have 562,500 direct labor hours. In assembly, we have 437,500 direct labor hours. In general administration, we have 31,000. Factory maintenance, we have 27,000. In factory cafeteria, we have 42,000 direct labor hours. So at some point in this problem, we're going to have to take those and convert them into decimal fractions, because we're going to use decimal fractions to do the cross transfers based on percentage of use. But that's one of the hooks here, is we are going to do 3 methods. In each of the 3 methods, we convert different numbers here into decimal fractions. So when you're looking at it, you don't just at the beginning convert everything to a proportional fraction, like percentage of direct labor in every department. For each of our 3 methods, some of them are used and some of them are not. So that's a bit of the difficulty of learning them. Actually, for the reciprocal method, the 3rd method, which we will not do in this video, you convert all of them to decimal fractions. But for the other 2 methods, you only convert a part of them. So what we have is a bit of a differential use of the information, right? And that means that actually not all of the information is going to be used in every one of our, whoops, I said that wrong. Not all of this information is actually used in the first 2 methods, the direct and the step method. That's their weakness, is that we don't use all of the information. In the reciprocal method, we will actually use every bit of that information. We'll convert it all to decimal equivalents, and it will all go into the mixture for the allocation. For the first 2 methods, they don't. So in this lecture, we're looking only at the first method. Yeah. So let's. You need to have this somewhere, so either write this down, print it off, put it on a different screen. It's in the textbook that you have, so you can also get it from the textbook. And you should have it in front of you, because we won't be able to come back to it that soon. So here we go. Let's move this around. Whiteboard wrestling 101. Okay, first thing we have to do is think about the problem setup. Okay, I have a very strong bias to that. Especially when you're dealing with, especially when you're making big noises. My podium just tipped over. The setup is really important. The setup can help you guide, just like the other parts of the class, the setup can help guide you into where you need to focus your thinking on. So what we're going to do is create this. This is a spreadsheet, right? And it's an accounting spreadsheet. It works pretty well in Excel, but also it was originally, like most accounting things, it was done on paper. So we need to set this up so that we can actually see our service departments and our production departments, and then we can transfer from the service to the production departments. So the first thing we need to do is list the departments on the side. Okay. These are the departments we're transferring from. You'll sort of see what I'm talking about in a minute. And these are the departments we're transferring sort of to. Okay, these are where the costs are. So first one we're going to have up there is the cafeteria. Then maintenance department. Then admin. And then we're going to be transferring into fabrication and assembly. Typically, with a little experience, you'd have a meaning behind some of these words. Fabrication usually means you're changing the shape of something, meaning you're cutting, punching, welding, bending, stuff like that. Assembly usually means you're taking things and screwing them together or attaching them, but you're not changing the shape. So that typically, if someone is talking about fabrication, they're talking about changing something, shape. Here they're talking about, and assembly would be putting things together. So often that would be two different departments, or more than two. You probably have 3 or 4 fabrication departments. Some people working on metal, a department working on plastic, on wood, but whatever. And then you have different sub-assembly departments. But what we're going to do is look at it like this. This is a spreadsheet. We're going to take the cafeteria cost, and we're going to start with the cafeteria. We're going to take this cafeteria cost, and we're going to transfer it to the other 4 departments. And this is called the direct method because this transfer, it goes from here directly over to the other departments. So, excuse me, I pointed the wrong way. It goes directly from the service department to the production departments. And we don't transfer from the cafeteria to the other service departments. So it's a direct transfer from one service department into the other production departments. And that's the weakness, is that there's no transfer between service departments. And sometimes it doesn't matter because service departments can be small, but actually in today's world, often the service departments are huge, complex, and that transfer is a huge amount of money. And so it totally changes the cost of certain products if you don't recognize the way some of the service departments interact with each other. So, and I've made a mistake, as usual. I should have skipped a line here. I hope you were writing in pencil, like all good accountants should. Okay. First thing we need to put on there is the total costs. Okay? And this is where you can come into a little bit of an issue, and you'll see that the answer in the solutions manual is different from what I'm going to put on the board, because at this point you can be asked 2 different questions. The question that the book is answering is one question. The way I'm going to write it up here is actually a different question. But the questions are based on the same data, same data exactly. And so you have to be careful when you're working a problem which question you're asked. Okay? And both questions are legitimate. Your book basically, I don't know why I say that. Your book is asking you to take all service department costs and transfer them to the production department, but they're asking you about total cost in the production department. They're not saying, the book's question doesn't say, what's the overhead in the production departments? It's saying, what's the total cost in the production departments? And that's why the book's answer has some different numbers, is they're putting all the direct costs in these 2 departments, okay? I'm now going to ask a different question, and you'll see my answer will be slightly different from the book. So that means you have 2 different models. You have the same data set, and you have the 2 questions. And one question is compute the total cost in fabrication and total cost in assembly. Okay, the book's answer does that. My answer is compute the total overhead cost in fabrication and assembly. Okay, first thing we have to do is put up there what these total costs are. So our total costs are, I need my piece of paper to write that down. This is where I really hate this midget whiteboard, this tiny whiteboard that I have. Because in Tarot, if we were all there, you know those rooms in Tarot, this problem would fill like the entire wall. It would be wall-to-wall whiteboards. Okay. And then here is where my answer is going to deviate. I'm going to actually pick up the 1650 and the 1850. Okay? What the book answer did, because they're asking, in the book they're solving for total costs, they actually put in the total cost of fabrication here, which would be $6,730,000, right? Remember, they'll write that down, write that off to the side with an asterisk. You have two different questions that you can be asked with this type of data. And right now, the question I'm asking you, and then asking myself, I guess, is what's total overhead cost in the two departments? Okay, so step one is we have a magic line in our brains. All these costs have to be transferred over to here. That's all we're doing. And that's what we call the allocation, and we have the three different methods to do that. So remember, in the text that we had, the cafeteria is done based on one method, on one piece of data, maintenance department on a different one, and the admin department on a different one. These are total costs in each department. Notice this includes direct labor, direct material, and some overhead, internal overhead. But we added up this entire $240,000, even though it has direct labor and direct material to the cafeteria, all of this is actually an indirect cost to fabrication and assembly. So as soon as we do this transfer, it becomes totally an indirect cost. And we'll do the first one. But first, let us look back at our little list and say, okay, how do we actually transfer, how do we transfer the cafeteria cost? What was the basis that we used for that? Well, number of employees, right? So what we need to do then is look at the data and say, how many employees do we have? If we look across, we will see, whoops, I have a couple of different things here. We're transferring from the cafeteria to fabrication and assembly based on the number of employees. And it's actually, and this is where you have to think for a minute, it's based on only the number of employees in fabrication and assembly. So if you look up there and you look at the number of employees in fabrication and assembly, and you compute the percentage only for those two. Remember, this is where the direct method doesn't use a lot of the data. The direct method just uses the proportions of the departments you're transferring to. So you would take the 562.5 and the 437.5, add them up, and just turn them into decimal fractions. And what you'll end up with is 0.526 and whoops, that's for a different problem. What you'll end up with is 0.58 and 0.42. So here, when I say different problem, that was for the step method. The decimal fraction I started to give you a step method. So here we're looking at this proportion is 0.58, and this is 0.42. Okay? On your paper, you're going to have a lot more space. Don't just write down 5.8 and walk away from it, because part of your review and your thinking is you got to remember where you got that from. Okay, so this number, this 0.58 is, where is that number? The 0.58 is 562,500 plus 437,500 is the denominator, and the 562.5 is the numerator for this one, and the 437.5 is the numerator for this number. So when you write this down, document how you actually got that. That will cause you to remember what's going on. So now you need to take 58% of 240,000 and 42% of 240,000, but we're going to do this in an accounting-like way. So notice the physical thing that I do as I write this down is I'm going to come here and I am going to do this, which is a journal entry. I'm transferring. This is a journal entry that transfers $240,000 out of the cafeteria account and into these other accounts. So, big question, is this a debit or credit? You know, on this sheet, this negative number, what does it represent? A debit or a credit? How do you transfer something out? Okay? If it's an asset account, remember, because we're in the factory, so we're putting money into all of these departments with debit entries. So that 240,000 is a debit balance. To get it out, it's a credit. So this actually represents a journal entry. So this is not just, you know, not just a schedule. It's the way we plan the journal entries. We don't do anything here and here. We're doing the direct method, so we're skipping a lot of that. And we're going to divide this using these two decimal fractions. We're going to take 0.58 and 0.42, and this will be 140,000. And this one will be 100,000. And unfortunately, I didn't line those up correctly. They're a little bit off. These two numbers are a little bit to the left. They should be a little bit to the right because that is not a million. So anyway, as you write it down a little bit more carefully and line up against the side. Then we're going to move to the maintenance department. Take a quick look back at what our denominator should be for the maintenance department. Or we're going to use it actually says we're going to use square foot occupied, right? So then we have to compute that. We have to look at the data set and say, okay, how many square feet were occupied? But remember, we're doing the direct method. So it's only how many were occupied by our production departments. If we look on our chart, we'll see the production department, fabrication had 88,000 square feet, and assembly had 72,000 square feet. So we need to turn those two into decimal fractions, 88 plus 72. Maybe I'll do it over here. So we're going to have 88 plus 72, and we're going to have 88 over that. That'll compute the decimal fraction that we need there, and that's going to be 55%. So 88 divided by 88 plus 0.72 is 0.55, 0.55, and so this one is going to be 0.45. Because the other one would be 72 over 88.2. Okay, so document that as you go. Don't just write these percentages down. Stop the video. Don't you wish you could do that in class? Just stop me. Stop the video and make your documentation make sense to you. Actually do the computation, show where it goes. So we now need to get rid of this. So this is 203. And we're showing that it is a credit journal entry. It is not being transferred to admin, only to the production departments based on these fractions. So then this will be 111,760. And even though I just 1 minute ago said that I should have lined this up better, of course I didn't line it up when I did that, 91,440. Maybe I'll try and line this one up. 99,440. So take a minute, take a look at that. And you get the idea. The next one is the admin department. We're going to do the same thing. And we're going to use the same process to get the percentages. I want you to stop this video for a second and you figure out the percentages that you'll be using for admin. You'll have to look again, I don't know if you have it in front of you, at what it says admin is allocated based on. Okay, admin is done based on direct labor hours, so you need to compute. Did I get that wrong? No. Yeah, admin is done based on direct labor hours. Wait, the cafeteria is done based on number of employees? You know, I think I sort of messed that up a little bit. I think when I was talking about the cafeteria, I said it was based on direct labor hours because I got lost when I was talking. But the numbers that I have up there are the correct numbers for number of employees, which would be 280 plus 200. So in total, there are 480 employees. I believe that I actually said with the cafeteria that we were talking about direct labor hours, and that's not correct. We did the cafeteria based on number of employees, not direct labor hours. We're back here to factory administration. We're doing that based on number of direct labor hours. And if you got lost and wondered what I was doing, you would see, even though I was saying up here, I said the word like we're doing direct labor hours. These are not the correct. These are not the correct fractions for direct labor hours. So, doing admin based on direct labor hours, we're going to get actually 0.56 and 0.44. This is all a trick. 90 and 70. What's the total here? 0. 0, 0. This is a check figure. Okay? This is a check figure that shows that we transferred everything out. It has to be 0 at the end. Notice that these are debit entries, so they're positive numbers. So everything on this line is actually journal entry. This line here is a journal entry. It says credit 240,000, debit 140, debit 100,000. This is, we're used to starting from the debit side. Debit 111,760, debit 99,440, credit 203,200. Okay, so this is an interdepartmental transfer. This is the mock-up of how we've prepared the journal entries, and it has the internal checks in it. If we were in Tarot and I had some extra space over here, if you sum across here, these journal entries are 0, not the top one, which is not a journal entry. I shouldn't have put an equal sign there. But the 3 journal entries, right, because debits equal credits, should sum to 0, so that's a check figure. But we now have a new total here. Okay? So our total here is 1,991,760. This is actually a total overhead for fabrication. And our total here is 211,1440. So we now have actually total overhead for fabrication and total overhead for assembly. So this is the first time you're actually seeing this process. Always in the past, when you were in your first, principles of accounting class, early management accounting classes, wherever you took accounting before, they just gave you this number. They just said, here, this is what it is. And actually, they usually didn't even do it by departments. They just said the factory overhead was total. So they would add these two. And and you did other stuff with them. You did a POR. Right now, we can do a POR here. And we will. So let's do a POR for fabrication. Let's say we're doing it based on direct labor hours. If we look into the data that we had, for fabrication, we had 562,500 direct labor hours. So if we take this number, 1,991,760, divided by 500, and whatever that number was, I have to look back on my page again, 562.5. Okay, this is dollars. This is DLH. Okay. So what we're going to get is $1 per direct labor hour rate for our POR. And this is $3.54 per DLH. So that is actually the POR for fabrication. It's still a simple one. It's the TOH POR, right? Total overhead. We haven't differentiated between fixed and variable overhead because, we don't want to kill you yet. That would be the next problem. We're just having you run through the basic cycle here. unfortunately, with these boards, this little whiteboard that I have, we can't, have it, bigger and make sense and have some of the discussions about it. Notice this is a pretty nifty little accounting schedule, though. If you set the schedule up first, it will help you with the problem. Remember this, come back, make a little asterisk on your notes. That is the overhead. And right down there, that Paul is solving a problem, or Paul is asking the question, what is total overhead and a POR in fabrication and in assembly? I didn't do the assembly. You can do that. Take this number divided by, it's not 562, by 437.5, because notice they have two different labor rates, or two different amounts of direct labor in the two different departments. So this is the direct method. Okay, it's the least accurate, but it's dead simple. You can explain it to almost anybody. If you know you're not going to do any analysis, just do this one, right? Because if you're not going to analyze it, it doesn't really matter, because it's all okay for financial statement purposes, right? Because all of the costs end up in cost of goods sold, and they're on the income statement. That's really remember, for financial accounting, the only thing that's important is that costs end up being expensed in the correct period. That's it. They don't have to be expensed to the correct product, to the correct department, nothing. It's just to the correct period. So actually, for financial accounting, this is as good as any of the other methods, right? So if you know that all you're doing is financial accounting and you're not going to do any analysis, you can just do this, you're fine. But what's wrong, you can actually look at the inaccuracy here, is this. We have information on these things. Notice in the data that we have here, we actually know all of that stuff. We actually have enough information that we could actually do things here and be more accurate. But this method ignores it. So this is the reason this is the least accurate is it deliberately ignores all of those bits of knowledge that we have about cross usage of things. So that's it. Next video will be a little bit shorter one. There'll be no intro. In the next lecture, we will take a look at the step method, which is the slightly more complex method than this, using the same database. So we've done step one then, the direct method. See you soon.